The second lesson this morning is from Paul's second letter to Timothy, the second chapter. Nothing like being consistent. You then, my son, be strong in the grace that you have in Christ Jesus, and what you've heard from me through many witnesses, and trust to faithful people who are willing to teach others as well. Share in suffering like a good soldier of Christ Jesus. No one serving in the army gets entangled in civilian affairs. The soldier's aim is to please his officer. And in the case of an athlete, no one is crowned without competing according to the rules of the game. And it is the farmer who does the real work who ought to have the first share of the crops. Think over what I say, for the Lord will give you understanding in all things. Let us bow for a moment. O God, help us to shake the defeats and discouragements, the cares and concerns that have been our lot in this week, that we may come refreshed and open and available to a spirit and word that may be indeed new life. For we ask it in the Spirit of Jesus. Amen. Two writers born around the turn of the century became famous for their predictions of our future. In fact, the most famous may have helped prove himself wrong. The English writer George Orwell, in his novel, which I'm sure you remember, 1984, predicted a worldwide totalitarian state in which Big Brother would monitor and control all of us by force and threat of force. As I say, his major contribution may have been alerting us to the dangers of precisely that kind of totalitarianism. He played his own role in ensuring that the 1984 he pictured never came true. But not long before him, an equally well-known English novelist also penned his prediction of our future. And it also involved a prediction of a totalitarian world, but not a world in which we would be held in conformity by virtue of force or threat of force, but a world in which we, in fact, would welcome. Aldous Huxley, in his work Brave New World, drew a picture of a future in which people submitted to control through a kind of happiness drug that turned them all into docile folk, easily controlled, with no desire to rebel or assert their individual freedom because they were so comfortable and content as they were. I begin to wonder whether Huxley, in the long run, didn't have it right. Millions now use drugs, for example, legal and illegal, to dull the pain of living and lend a kind of mindless euphoria to their days. And millions of Americans, to my eye, seem to use television as another drug. Why else sit stupefied before it for 7 hours a day, except to use it as an escape, a comfortable escape from thought and struggle and growth. And now comes the psychiatrist Peter Kramer, who has published a new popular volume called Listening to Prozac. I hasten to add, without question, a valuable drug in the treatment of severe depression, but he sells it for all of us. He assures us that all of us can become upbeat, self-assured, efficient, and happy if only we will take this happiness pill. The day of cosmetic pharmacology has arrived. Question: would it be good for us to attain happiness, peace of mind, self-esteem, personal efficiency so easily? Would it be good for us if via pill or tube we could still all our anxieties and become thoroughly comfortable and content? Would it be good for us if life became so delightfully easy? In some respects, I suppose modern comforts and conveniences haven't entirely hurt us. Technology has made our days more efficient and less drudgery. James Rogers writes, our 17-year-old daughter was about to go on a date with a boy that we had not met. and we told her that she could not leave with him if he drove up and blew his horn. Just then the phone rang. It was him, calling from his car phone to say that he was waiting outside in the driveway. But there is real danger that life can become entirely too easy and we too addicted to the easy way. Edwin Bliss writes, we live in a culture which almost worships comfort now. During this century, we've seen the greatest assault on discomfort and pain in the history of the human race. We've learned to control depression and stress. Most of this is to the good. Unfortunately, it has also created in many the impression that the goal of life can be to attain a state of nirvana without struggle or strain. I think this is what William Broyles, former editor of Newsweek, was driving at when he told this story to a group of college students about to graduate. This February, I went down to the Andes and climbed a mountain 23,000 feet high, the highest mountain in this hemisphere. We began at 9,000 feet, went up the valley of the Herconus River. It was hot. In the distance, we could see the mountains and the clouds, and then I suddenly realized that the highest cloud wasn't a cloud at all. It was the mountain. We stopped at our base camp, 14,500 feet. We climbed from there to 18,000 feet, with me trying to keep up with climbers who were in their 20s. The problem was I wanted to be 20, they were. But I soon realized that the battle was not between them and me, but the battle was between this mountain and me. Our last camp was at 19,000 feet. We had to get up at 5 in the morning. It was 20 degrees. By the time we got to 20,000 feet, I was taking 8 breaths for every single step. And I wanted to quit. I wanted to stop. My mind kept telling me this is crazy. But something deep down inside of me kept saying, up, up, up. 3 hours for the last 1,000 feet, clawing my way, fingers, feet, knees, always up, up, and finally there was no more. I was on the top. I expected then on the summit that I would have some profound thoughts about the meaning of life, but the only thing that came to mind was, get me out of here. I was on the summit less than 5 minutes. But I realized later on that making it really didn't mean what I thought it would mean and wasn't really what mattered at all. The important thing wasn't the summit, but the climb. Now, why would I do such a thing? Not because it was there, the mountain, as they like to say, but because I was there. For the same reason you will climb the mountains of your life, because you are there. We must do the difficult things in life. Everyone will face mountains. They will be called to climb, and they're worth taking on, not because they are easy, but precisely because they are hard, because it's the hard journeys that are always the ones that matter. They make us what we are. What if nothing that comes easy is really worth having? What if the hard journeys matter because they do make us? They shape us into strong, mature, resourceful human beings. Surely we recognize this in the physical realm. We know, whether we do it or not, that without exercise and discipline of the body and physical effort, we easily become lazy and less efficient and prey to disease and deterioration. We watched the Olympics recently. What if some scientists came up with genetic engineering that could turn every one of us overnight into world-class athletes? No long years of strenuous exercise and training anymore. No more early mornings punishing the body and focusing the will. Just a minor little procedure and we all become superhuman acrobats or speed demons. It would really take the whole meaning out of it, wouldn't it? In fact, our fascination and admiration is rooted in the struggle and self-discipline that these athletes have had to go through to get there. I hope we recognize that this is equally true of intellectual or artistic endeavor. John Ruskin once said, every poem, every piece of music is the result of blood sacrifice. And we know now that the mind is a muscle, no less than all the rest of them, and if it is not stretched and exercised, it too atrophies. Half the reward of human learning and discovery derives from the struggle of the human mind and what it becomes in that struggle. the late Wernher von Braun, father of our space program, wrote this: "Shortly after I turned 8 years of age in Germany, I learned that an old hero of mine, a famous German scientist, had written a paper claiming that we could get to the moon with rockets. I could hardly wait to get my young hands on that paper. But when it came, my heart sank. The paper had almost no writing in it. It was one long, complicated mathematical equation. The trouble was I hated math and I'd flunked it in school. But this is what it took to get a rocket in space. Not romantic stories, not daydreams about space, but math. When I found that I had to learn math if I wanted to put a rocket in space, I resigned myself to learning math. And with it, I eventually got rockets in space. But it was worth every ounce of effort, not only for what it did for the space program, but more important, what it did for me, what it made of me." Now, the biblical writers certainly understand this attitude toward life. Again and again, they appeal for the strenuous life. They call for the life of effort and endeavor, endure hardness, run the race, accept discipline. Paul, writing to his adopted son, certainly mixes the metaphors. He talks about the suffering of the good soldier, then he talks about the discipline of the Olympic Games, then he talks about the hard labor of the farmer, but I think his point is clear. Real life is the strenuous life, the life of effort and endeavor. And what if the growth and development of our inner world, the world of spirit and character, is no different than the world of athletics or academics? What if inner peace and equanimity and self-esteem and strength of spirit come not as the result of a quick read from Crown Books or a weekend seminar or a bottle of pills, but what if spiritual growth and maturity that brings the real peace and satisfaction in life comes only as the result of years of endeavor, every bit as strenuous as intellectual or athletic accomplishment? What is? Because this is finally what the biblical metaphors are all about. Paul is not concerned about military service or Olympic Games or even the struggle to survive. He's talking about being strong in the grace of Christ. You see, grace does not annul the requirement that we get up in the morning and go at it again. In fact, grace is precisely the freedom and strength to get up and go at it again. He talks about accepting the suffering of a good soldier of Christ. He talks about a life bent on the growth of a spirit and character just like his. So what does it take to do it? To achieve a truly healthy and accomplished spirit? What does it take to establish and sustain a strenuous and stretching life amid the siren calls to softness in this kind of world? It takes two things. In the first place, it takes a clear sense of destination beyond ourselves. A vision, in other words, of what we might become as human beings, quite apart from business or profession or parenting. And it takes disciplines appropriate to that destination. We grow, we become strong, and our lives take on meaning when we're clear about where we're headed or want to go. A soldier doesn't get mixed up in civilian affairs. He knows what he has signed up for. He knows what is required of him. And he's not diverted by extraneous matters. Now, I recognize that a lot of us here this morning are not indolent, lazy couch potatoes who make no effort or struggle. In fact, about 75% of the people in this crowd on any given Sunday morning are probably compulsives of the worst order. You know? They do struggle. They do endure a lot of effort. But it's if on the one hand laziness is the danger, on the other hand fragmentation and lack of clarity about goals is also the danger. My favorite bit by Judith Viorst in this regard, describing a lot of us, is, I think, right to the point. She writes, "I've finished 6 pillows in needlepoint, and I'm reading Jane Austen and Kant, and I'm up to the pork with black beans in advanced Chinese cooking. I don't have to struggle to find myself, for I already know what I want. I want to be healthy and wise and extremely good looking. I'm learning new glazes in pottery class, and I'm playing new chords in guitar, and in yoga I'm starting to master the lotus position. I don't have to ponder priorities, for I already know what they are. to be good-looking, healthy, and wise, and adored in addition. I'm improving my serve with a tennis pro, and I'm practicing verb forms in Greek, and in primal scream therapy, all my frustrations have been vented. I don't have to ask what I'm searching for, since I already know that I seek to be good-looking, healthy, and wise, and adored and contented. I've boomed in organic gardening, and in dance I have tightened my thighs, and in consciousness raising there's no one around who can top me, and I'm working all day and I'm working all night to be good-looking, healthy, and wise, and adored, and contented, and brave, and well-read, and a marvelous hostess, fantastic in bed, and bilingual and artistic. Won't somebody please stop me? Dr. Raymond Flannery Jr. is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. He writes, "Who are the stress-resistant people?" I became interested in this question as the result of some personal observations. One Saturday evening, after I'd myself spent a frazzling day working with stressed out people in the clinic, I turned to a nurse who was also working there and said something like, "Everybody and his brother seems to have gone through here today." And she turned and looked at me and said, "You know better than that. Some people never come here." I started to wonder what such people were like. What do you think he discovered? Those least likely to show up at the clinic were those who were personally committed to some one or two goals, some mission in life about which they felt deeply and around which they had organized their life. Whether it was completing a college career or being a better parent or advancing some community service. But in any case, these people were doing some one or two things that provided a sense of challenge and direction and organization and focus that all gave their lives meaning. Without clear-cut goals, life becomes drift, loses its sense of meaning and urgency. There's a lovely little vignette in Chaim Potuk's story called The Chosen, which I love. The rabbi father is trying to urge a life of commitment upon his son who has lost the sight of one eye in an accident. "You're no longer a child, Reuven," my father said. "It's almost impossible to see the way your mind is growing and your heart too. You do not see it, but I see it, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. So listen to what I'm going to tell you." My father paused for a moment as if considering his next words carefully, and then continued, "Human beings do not live forever, Reuven. We live less than the time it takes to blink an eye, if we measure our lives against eternity. So it may be asked what value there is to a human life. There's so much pain in the world. What does it mean to have to suffer and struggle so much if our lives are nothing more than the blink of an eye?" Then my father paused again, his eyes misty now, and he went on, "I learned a long time ago, Reuven, that a blink of an eye in itself is nothing. But the eye that blinks, that is something else. A span of life is nothing. But the man who lives that span, he is something. And he can fill that tiny span with meaning and purpose if he will. Do you understand what I'm saying, Reuven? A man must fill his life with meaning. It's hard work to fill one's life with meaning, but a life filled with meaning is a life that is finally worthy of rest." So I might ask, what is it you're really living for? What are the one or two interests, adventures that give your life meaning and depth, that stretch you, that make you become more than you are this day? No clear-cut destination, no growth, no real happiness. Real life, life of growth of spirit, no less than physical or mental, calls for clear destination, and then it also requires for daily disciplines that are appropriate to that destination, just as much as any other activity in this world. Dreams and fantasies alone don't do it. Two psychiatrists at a convention, as they conversed over a drink, one asked the other, what's been one of your most difficult cases lately? And the other replied, "Well, I had a patient who lived in a world of pure fantasy. He was convinced that an uncle in South America was going to die and leave him a fortune. And then all his problems would be solved. And every day, all day long, he would wait for a letter to arrive from an attorney, and he never went out, and he never did anything worthwhile. He just sat around and waited for this fantasy letter from a fantasy uncle. And I worked with this man for 8 years trying to get him to face up to reality. What happened? Asked the colleague. Well, replied the psychiatrist, it was an 8-year struggle. 3 times a week for 8 years, but I finally cured him. And then that stupid letter arrived. Wouldn't it be nice if we all won the lottery, you know? You see those commercials on television of those people who can't believe it. Ed McMahon did it. But we know it doesn't work that way. The farmer has to plow and plant and weed and harvest, and the Olympian has to train, exhausting day after day. The soldier has to suffer the indignities of boot camp. If we want to grow into lives of spirit and courage, of character and stability, of integrity and impact on the world around us, we too must submit to the disciplines that grow that kind of life. Disciplines of solitude and reflection and prayer and reading and common life and service to the needy. There was another Olympian who demonstrated this with his whole life. I've told part of his story before. Perhaps you remember him, maybe not his name, Eric Liddell, but certainly the movie of which he was the hero, Chariots of Fire. Inspiring as the story was, I suspect many in the modern world could not quite understand a personality so principled that he would be prepared to throw away fame and success rather than run on Sunday in the Olympics of 1924. But the film hardly does justice to the whole man. I think very few people, I didn't even remember seeing them, saw the words flashed on the screen at the conclusion of the credits at the end of the movie. They said simply, Eric Liddell, missionary, died in occupied China at the end of World War II. All Scotland mourned. You see, after the famed Olympic victory that was his, he walked away from it all to go to China as a missionary educator. He taught science at the Anglo-Chinese College in Tientsin and then worked in the rural countryside. As conditions in China deteriorated in the weeks before Pearl Harbor, he arranged for his wife and children to return to England, planning to follow them shortly. But then before he could escape, he was rounded up along with the others by the invading Japanese army and interned for the duration. One who knew him in the Weisheim internment camp writes about him, Eric Liddell stood out among the 1,800 people packed into our camp, which measured only 150 by 200 yards. His gentle face and warm smile, even as he taught us games with the limited equipment available, showed us how much he loved, especially children, and missed his own. His was a selfless and humble spirit lived out before us. He gave special care to the older people, the weak, and the ill. And without the faithful and cheerful support of Eric, many of us would have never made it. In a camp rife with criticism and backbiting and gossip and selfishness, there was no one who had a bad word to say about Eric. His attitude toward everyone was the same. You could find him talking to a businessman just the same as to the Roman Catholic priest or a child from Chefu, the school for missionary children. Unfortunately for Eric, death came just months before liberation. I remember seeing him the day before he died. That day he was walking slowly under the trees. As usual, he had a smile for everyone. We knew nothing of the pain he was hiding, nor of the brain tumor that was to take his life the next evening, February 21st, 1945. But none of us will ever forget this man who was totally committed to his God, a man whose humble life combined a kind of muscular Christianity with radiant godliness. Mrs. Isabel Heron, who was one of the members of the camp, said of him, when Eric died, one of the women in the camp, a Russian prostitute, told my mother that Eric Liddell was the only man who had ever done anything for her and not wanted anything in return. He put up some shelves for her. And it didn't matter what walk of life a person came from, Eric worked right across the board with everyone. He must have been very strong because he really did treat us all the same. But where did such strength of spirit come from? He brought to his personal life the same discipline, you see, that he brought to the track during those years of preparation for the Olympics. And another who was there with him in the camp says that her most singular memory of him was the sight of him early mornings, off in a corner, quite by himself, in the mists of dawn, bent over his Bible, deep in reflection and in prayer to his God. Endure suffering as a good soldier. Like an Olympic runner, keep the rules. Be strong in the grace of your Lord. Amen.